Welcome to the My Relationship Fell podcast, where love life blunders transform into epic comebacks. Dive into juicy stories, face tough truths, and spark powerful transformations. And now, with this week's episode, your host, Bryan Power.
Hey everybody, welcome to the My Relationship Fail podcast. I'm on a mission to help save as many relationships as possible. And I've got a guest here today that's going to help us do just that. His name is Jake, not from State Farm, Jaffe. Now, Jake Jaffe is a relationship coach that works directly with Thais Gibson, the creator of the Personal Development School and the Integrated Attachment Theory program that helps individuals go from unhealthy attachment styles into a secure attachment style. Now, this is the same program that helped save my relationship and gave me the tools necessary that I now use to have healthier, happier connections. Now, Jake is a specialist when it comes to the anxious preoccupied attachment style and teaches a weekly webinar around that, as well as a weekly webinar around communication. Now, both of those webinars are absolutely amazing, and I try to attend those as regularly as possible. Now, I am super excited to dive into this topic. So, Jake Jaffe, welcome to the My Relationship Fail podcast.
Thank you, Bryan. I'm excited to be here and excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. So much great stuff here to go through. But before we do that, I really want to get to know you, right? I've been in your courses for so long now, and I've learned so much from you on that side. And I'm excited for you to share that with our audience. But I really don't know much about Jake Jaffe. So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about like what it was like for you, say, growing up. How did it all start?
Yeah. So great question. You get to pull back the curtains
That's
and
right.
now everybody
That's
gets to see what's behind there. So growing up, well, I guess we'll really start at the beginning. So I was adopted at birth and, parents took me home and, lovely, wonderful parents. And, every human is flawed, right? So a lot of what my experience was growing up, my dad worked a lot. So he was going off, traveling, wasn't around a whole lot. And, again, wonderful human being, love him to death. And then, my mom was with us quite a lot. And she had a lot of, I would say, challenges in regulating her own emotions, which really deeply impacted me and how I felt I could emotionally regulate. And then, my dad being somebody who leaned a little bit more probably on the anxious side of things, also felt like, okay, I don't have a capacity or understand or have modeling to really learn how to regulate my own emotions, and that I don't have, again, good modeling for what that looks like or understanding that. And we also had a lot of, I would say, probably like codependent patterns in our family where, the expectation is we show up for each other's needs. And again, maybe not great modeling for what it looks like to show up for our own. And in growing up, becoming a kid, I was very naive. My my mom loved me to death and was, maybe a little bit overly cautious. I had some challenges in learning and whatnot. And so she very much catered to the fact that I didn't really know how to do that stuff very well and really held my hand a lot, which I think in her, kind of from her perception, she was really helping me. And at the same time, I think that also really hindered my capacity to learn how to, figure these things out myself. And so coming out of the house, becoming an independent human was very weird.
Right.
I'll never forget I had a doctor's appointment and I think I was like 16 or 17 or, maybe even 18. And my mom was still going to my appointments with me. And I like sat down in the appointment and, we were sitting there for like 20, 30 minutes. And she's like, what the heck is going on? Like, did you check in? And I was like, no. She's like, what do you mean you didn't check in? And I was like, well, I didn't know I needed to. And so it was like, a lot of very much hand holding. And it felt like I had a lot of, coming out of that, like I had a lot to catch up on and being an adult. And, in kind of around that same time is when dating really started for me. I had a long-term relationship. Well, let's maybe dial back
Yeah.
the
Oh,
time a little bit here.
real quick. Number one, were you an only child?
Yeah, I have a younger
Okay,
sister.
younger sister. Okay, so you're the older stuff
Yeah.
too there. So yeah, it's natural that parents are kind of,
Yep.
maybe overprotected at
Yep.
times. Some of that stuff going on there. Yep. And
Very
where
much
did you
so.
grow up? Where are you from?
Yeah. So I was born in LA, grew up in Santa Barbara, California. So I was very
Oh,
lucky,
yeah,
very fortunate.
that's too shabby.
Terribly ugly place.
Awful
Nobody
place.
ever
Yeah,
wants to
awful.
go. Yeah. So so I moved from LA to Santa Barbara when yeah, I don't really remember it. I was basically
Yeah,
a baby,
yeah.
but grew up largely in Santa Barbara, but also spent a lot of time on the East Coast. Um, Ended up going out there for college and, why I feel so close to
Oh,
Boston.
yeah,
And I know
yeah,
you're in
baby.
that
That's
area,
right.
and have lots of friends in that area. So,
Awesome, that's awesome. So it sounds like your parents
yeah,
were pretty good parents overall, right? But they
yeah,
sound like your dad was in and
yeah,
out a lot, like he was working a lot and stuff, and mom was
yeah,
kinda left to kinda deal with the kids a lot, and sometimes maybe had her own issues trying to regulate and deal with all the stress of all of that, and so that was beginning
yeah,
to it sounds like, shape your obvious perception and how you would ultimately kinda, were raised and now would as you're an adult becoming into your adult life, if you will, your
very much so.
perceptions were shaped by that, correct? Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And, as we'll get into later, how that influenced my perception of the stability of love, right? With, my dad being somebody who was kind of in and out all the time. And, being a kid, it's really hard to understand that. And where that really impacted my understanding of, again, the stability of that love, my own perceptions of abandonment, which then, as again, we'll probably touch on
Yeah.
some more later, that, love is unstable and I'm going to be abandoned was a big piece for me. And that also kind of ties back into the adoption piece as well.
Yeah, I feel the same way. My father was in and out of my life as well, childhood, but for different reasons, but, also developed that
Sure.
hardcore fear of abandonment. So let me ask you this, so now you're growing up here, kind of a pretty good life overall, living in California of all places, not too shabby.
Yeah.
And you start getting
Yeah.
older, you mentioned a little bit about starting to date, right? So how old were you when you started to get into relationships, starting to, maybe start dating and all that good stuff?
So, I would say the first attempt, I think I was like 12 or something. And, my best friend was dating this girl
Yeah,
and I was really into her best
yeah.
friend and, passing notes back and forth. And I asked her out and just got rejected. It was like, nah,
Ouch,
not interested at all.
ouch.
And I was like, well, I'm never doing that again.
Not a good start.
So, it did not start off great. And sort of, that really, I think also formulated this idea that, well, other people don't really want me. And, tying back into a little bit of the adoption and not like a conscious awareness around that, but really a big fear around putting myself out there in dating. So I really didn't do that again until
Yeah,
high school and, kind of had like a very short, typical, like maybe 2 or 3 month long
right, yeah.
relationship and met somebody really special. Her and I started dating, and I think we dated for about 2 years. I had met her. She was on the East Coast at the time, and that was also a really big formative relationship for me and was quite unstable, I would say. Great for the first year. And then she went off to college. I was still in high school, and I think there was a lot of challenges that we faced that also I think led into and kind of fed some of the beliefs that I had developed that we've talked about a little bit already of, the instability of love and that love can be basically rejected or lost in a moment's notice. And that really isn't something that, or something that can be challenged quite easily,
Wow, yeah, so
I would
that's
say.
obviously shaping the way you're thinking now. It's almost
Yeah.
reaffirming what you've already kinda subconsciously believing in yourself, and so That's kind of a
Absolutely.
painful wound that when somebody leaves you like that, that Band-Aid, if you will, is
Yeah.
ripped open and that wound is exposed big time. And that's when we find a lot of times that's when we're going to, our wounds are
Yeah.
exposed and when we can kind of, figure it out a little bit. But if we don't have that awareness,
Yeah.
we're just kind of feeling the pain and kind of wondering, what's going
Yeah.
on here. And we just assume that this is kind of normal, if you will. But in reality, these are things that
Percent.
patterns that we start to develop that ultimately, if we can figure that out, we can begin to heal those, which hopefully we'll get into that here as we
Yeah.
go. So that was kind of your
Yes.
early
Yeah.
relationships. Now, was that kind of a
Yeah.
pattern that happened throughout your adult life? Were you able to have some other decent relationships and then one that ultimately led to some really like the final like learning experience, if you will?
Yeah. I think you'll notice a pattern here.
Yeah.
So, I had that initial interaction, that initial rejection, and didn't date anybody for a long time. And then dated that partner of mine kind of into college. That didn't work out. And I was like, I'm going to be single.
This is too
Screw
painful.
this stuff. This hurts really
This
bad.
hurts too much. I'm giving
I
it up.
don't like this. Yeah. So, and, kind of had this idea that I really wanted to be, I wanted to be somebody that people wanted, that women wanted, that, was really free. And so I didn't date much in college, things here and there. And really that extended to, I would say, outside of college, where I started to develop some more meaningful relationships. But again, always kind of now at this point, really looking for, when is that hammer going to drop? When is the shoe going to drop?
Right.
This is going to end at some point anyways, so I might as well end it now, looking for my way out very quickly, anywhere from like 3 to 6 months into a relationship where I'm like, well, this just isn't going to work. So
Yeah, so in the
I'm
back
out.
of your mind, because of some of your own experiences, you're kind of thinking, "This
Yeah.
this is too good. This is probably going to end," and you're already kind of
Yeah.
having the fear of like all this stuff coming. You're waiting for the hammer to drop
Yeah.
and the pain to come again.
Yeah.
Like, right? Yeah,
Yeah. Some of the lack of, really like a perception of that there's a big lack of safety in connecting to other people. And at the same time, some senses of, well, love can be really safe and good, and I do desire that. And, on the other hand, like people can really hurt me with
right,
this, and that feels really scary.
right.
And at that time and in this period, that was not something that I was aware of whatsoever, but, something that I came to develop an understanding around, in my own
Yeah,
journey.
it's a natural fear, right? Sometimes it's like the more we love
Yeah.
somebody, we know we're feeling vulnerable. That's that vulnerability. It's like, man,
Yeah.
I put my heart into this. I love this person, and if that person, walks away or something happens, then a lot of times we're feeling that extreme pain on the flip side. And so we start to develop these patterns as to, how not to let that happen, right? How to like make sure that
Yeah.
this person sticks around and doesn't hurt me, right? And so sometimes that's where
Yeah.
we're now doing some things that are maybe a little bit more needy, a little bit more in the subconscious realm. We're behaving in ways that aren't really becoming of a good quality relationship and connection, a connection that is based
Yeah.
around trust and love and all those good things. We're now operating from a wounded spot and sometimes causing subconscious problems in the relationships that we don't even realize, right? And so, is that right? Yeah,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah. And I would even add to that what aren't really truly authentic versions of ourselves. I think a lot of times, I am fascinated by attachment styles. It's such a cool area of work. Obviously, I work in it now. And I think we can sometimes overly identify with the label of our attachment style. And that is just, I think, something that is a really helpful context for us to understand what comes up and maybe some of the experiences that we have had, the core wounds and the messaging and conditioning that we've received, and that these are just pieces of ourselves that we get to heal, right? And it's not a label that we extend off into forever, but hey, this is a moment in time. There's a reason I've been and experience relationships in the way that I do, and that there is a real authentic version of myself underneath all of this, that once we can reprogram a lot of those fears and wounds out of the way, that gets to shine through and we get to really truly develop meaningful relationships, as is true of your
I
experience.
love that. That's so true. I say that too. Is like we are not our attachment style. That is not defined.
Yeah.
We have an attachment style. We have a way of
Yeah.
behaving and thinking about things, and then we can kind of put those in some categories, and we'll talk about that. I want you to go over those a little bit here in a
Yeah.
little bit. We can kind
Yeah.
of look at us in certain categories because there are certain styles, certain behaviors that kind of work over here and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But we're not our attachment style. And the great news is, as you know, we can go from the unhealthy attachment styles, and we can work to the point where we can develop a very secure, healthy, secure attachment style
Absolutely.
that allows us to have really
Yeah.
good quality relationships. Before we get into that, though, I want to find out what was like the final relationship maybe that you had, the one that really kind of changed your life and ultimately would push you towards learning about the attachment theory and push you into this entire experience yourself?
Absolutely. So this was in grad school, had I would say there was kind of two elements to this. The early element is I had gotten out of a relationship again because I had this idea that I needed to be this single suave guy
Okay.
that all the ladies
Yeah,
wanted.
yeah.
That was never me, by the way, but this idea that I had in my
Yeah,
head
I've had
that
that
was
grandiose idea too,
maybe
but I failed too.
some
Yeah, I get it.
some societal conditioning there. But so I had left this, year-long relationship because I want to be single in grad school. And, you know, in grad school, having moved on from that relationship, met somebody else, and my ex had posted something on Instagram with her with a new guy. And I was devastated. And it really like shocked me because I was like, what? Like, where are all these feelings come from? Because, at the time, yeah, it was emotional and there was some challenges in ending the relationship, but I, essentially had kind of like moved on and put it past me. And to have this experience of recognizing like, oh my God, like I actually really love this woman. And that relationship was something that I am now recognizing I really should have held on to. And so there's something that within me that really suppressed that and pushed that down and kind of ran away from. And now I'm in this new relationship, and for probably one of the first times in my life was also really vulnerable with this person because she was like, "What's going on? You seem really down." And I shared with her, and essentially she said, was very accepting. And she was like, "I get that. I understand." And she really showed up, and I was like, "Holy crap. Like, what is this?"
Wow.
I expected her to lose her mind and be like, "I can't believe you're still in
Yeah,
love
right.
with your ex." And, but was very understanding, very accepting. And where I was like, wow, like I've never had that kind of an experience in sharing something with somebody before. And so that kind of transformed me into really wanting a relationship with her. And we had, an interesting relationship because it always had an end date. She was like, "I'm going off into the Peace Corps and I'm, basically going to be leaving. So, and if not, then I'm going to be moving somewhere else." And so there was always this, and I look back on it now, I'm like, what were you thinking? But hey, feelings are
Right.
feelings, right? And so we really went for it. And obviously the relationship deepened. We got closer and closer. We were going to end the relationship. She left. I was seeing a therapist at the time, and the therapist worded it in a way that I really couldn't deny. And she was like, "Well, it really sounds like the feelings that you have for this person are stronger than the distance." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, that is very true." So she's like, "I think you should really fight for it." So I fought for it. I can't say I would agree with the advice now, but
Right.
hindsight's 2020. And getting into that relationship, excuse me, the only way that she would do it was if we had like an open relationship. I didn't really want that, but I wasn't willing. I couldn't say no.
Mm.
Like I couldn't stand up for myself. I didn't know what my needs were. I didn't express that that made me really uncomfortable and that wasn't what I wanted, but she was projecting that onto me and saying like, the only way I'll do that is if we do this together because you have physical needs and I can't meet those. And
Yeah.
I was like, that doesn't matter to me. Anyways, so that really led to a lot of instability, a lot of this, fear of betrayal, fears of, this feels really unsafe. I don't feel that I can trust this person, fears of abandonment. And eventually that came true. So we tried to mend that. It didn't work. She ended up ending the relationship. And in ending the relationship, she was like, you just don't have any passions. Like, you're not a passionate human being. Like, this is all, like, you have invested so much into this relationship that, like, that's it.
Right.
And I was like, holy crap. I can't say that she's really
Right.
wrong.
At that point, she's not
And
wrong.
actually, some of the books back here are some of the first books that I bought that started this journey. And what was initially, how do I develop passion so I can get her back?
Yeah.
I think there's like the passion test
Right.
and it all starts with passion are like two of the books that I
Yeah.
like immediately ordered off Amazon. I was having a really difficult time around that period and started seeing a different therapist than the one I mentioned earlier. And in one of the sessions with him, the session's wrapping up and he goes, "Hey, Jake, I think you really need to get in touch with your emotions." And I was like, okay, that sounds good. And he's like, we're wrapping up here, but, we'll get onto that. But like, I think you need to start doing that. I was like, okay, great. I go home. I get home and I'm like thinking about, okay, get in touch with your emotions. Let's let's do that.
Yeah.
How do you do that? I was like, I have no idea where to even begin. Not something I'd ever tried or thought of, or, what are emotions? I know you can be good or bad or sad.
Right.
It's like some very basic ideas of what emotions were. And so I looked it up online and like literally word for word in YouTube was how do you get in touch with your emotions? And through some of that work and through some of looking at some of the videos, I found Thais Gibson's work and was like, holy crap, like this feels like it explains so much of my experience. I feel so seen and understood. This is exactly the problems that me and my ex had. And again, where
Yeah.
I'm like, ooh, all right, I'm going to be able to get her back now that I understand
Yeah.
her.
Right.
And where my journey really began in PDS was essentially all of that.
Wow. So how long were you with the girl? How long were you guys together?
Yeah, I would say probably coming up on a year and a half, maybe 2 years.
Okay, so it wasn't super short, but it wasn't super long either. So about a year and a half to
Yeah,
2 years,
yeah,
of this, but you were fully invested, fully in love kind of thing, and full of
yeah,
emotions
yeah,
that we had no idea were there type of thing, but or how to label those, but yep.
yeah,
And so that ultimately that journey, wow, that started you to search and get some therapy, and then he suggested that, and then you came across Thais Gibson's work, which is, amazing as well, because I had that same experience when my wife and I were struggling and stuff. I was trying to figure things out. I started hitting the YouTube, and, I was very fortunate to come across some of her work, right? And, she has a really great video. It's about an hour, 15 minutes long on the Mel Robbins show, and she goes into the 4
yeah,
attachment styles, and that podcast changed my life because by the end of that, I was like, "Oh, wow, like, I got this. Like, I know I see my girl. I see my side a little bit here. Like, we're good." But I was
yeah,
more focused on her side at that time, but I was like, "Oh, I got it figured out," right? But yeah, so that was amazing journey, and that started me down that path as well. So how did that progress then? So you've come across Thais Gibson's work, and now you're a coach.
yeah,
Now you've been working with her for years. Like, how long ago number 1, how long ago was that? And then how did that progress?
yeah. Yeah. So at the time, originally, I was a physical therapist. That relationship ended kind of at the end of that while I was starting some of my postdoc work. Found Thais's work, and I was like, holy crap, again, this explains so much. And eventually she came to offer a certification. And at that point, I'd been in the school for probably like 3 years and was like, well, I feel like I've kind of learned a lot of what's here and I'd love to deepen that work as well as feel like I have something more to offer my physical therapy patients. So I took the certification and, a short time after that ended, I was, very honored, but Thais reached out to me and was like, "Hey, do you want to come work for us?" And yeah, I didn't know how to say no to that
Yeah, nice.
and was very excited by the idea. And so that started around, late 2022 and then really started working for PDS around 2023 and was splitting my time between PT and coaching. And then eventually realized like, wow, I really love this stuff. I'm somebody that was always a work to live person, not your work is supposed to be, I just a way to make money. And eventually I was like, you know what, I think I really like this. Let me quit PT. And I transitioned to full-time coaching a little over a year ago and, really haven't looked back.
I hope you're enjoying today's episode. Just a reminder, if you're going through a breakup or just need help having healthier relationships, make sure to visit myrelationshipfail.com and book a free strategy session. If you need a speaker for your event, think you would be a great guest on this show, or would like me to appear on your podcast, make sure to go to myrelationshipfail.com and book a call. Also, make sure to like, follow, subscribe, leave comments, and share this show with your friends and family. It really helps us get the message to more people who can benefit from this information. Now, back to the show. Wow, that's amazing. And you're great at what you do. Fascinating stuff. But can you talk a little bit about the attachment theory, right? For anybody who doesn't know, can you give us an idea of attachment theory and the 4 different attachment styles? Give us a little synopsis of that.
Yeah. So we'll start with secure, right? That's our aim. That's where we're going for. These are people that had a lot of approach-oriented parenting in childhood, very emotionally attuned. The parents show up for the child's needs, and they very much feel like they can express their needs, express their emotions, that all of those things are very safe. And as a result, come to have very long-lasting and sustainable relationships, right? Because they don't have a lot of these big fears that tend to show up for those of us that maybe have an insecure attachment style. Next, we have we have secure, dismissive avoidant, fearful avoidant, anxious preoccupied. Our dismissive avoidants tend to be the individuals that were like, hey, my childhood was pretty good. I had, sort of the stereotypical needs met. They were, electricity was running, there was food on the table. But a lot of times they don't get the emotional attunement, and that kind of like goes over a lot of people's heads because they're like, no, everything was good. There wasn't really big fights. And, there was a family unit, but, how much emotional attunement happened really wasn't there. And so they have to come to show up for their own needs and have a lot of, deep beliefs around shame and feeling defective or that there's something wrong with them. Then we have our fearful avoidance. They tend to have, really big challenge. All of us have challenges, different challenges, right? But that's where you'll see almost more like capital T, big T trauma, abuse, parents who are alcoholics or drug abusers. And that's where, you can also see that individuals have, or even, people with narcissistic parents, where love can be very safe at times, or, in the instance of, an alcoholic parent where, the parent is really loving if they've only had a couple of drinks and they can be present. And you're like, ooh, I like this. Love is safe. Love is good. I want this. And then also on the other side of that, love is really unsafe. Love isn't something that I can count on. And where you have a lot of that push-pull of, really desiring close romantic relationships, but that those romantic relationships really have the capacity to hurt you. And then we get to our anxious preoccupied individuals, and those are people who had a lot of those big, either real abandonment or the perceived abandonment. And so essentially they have a lot of deep ties to love being really unsafe. Love can be taken away at any time. Like I have to maintain proximity to others, that there's essentially this really deep fear of abandonment, rejection, being alone, because they never get the capacity or understand how to soothe themselves. And so they come to project those things on adult romantic relationships.
Yeah.
And I would say that's kind of the spectrum.
Gotcha. If you don't mind me asking, where did you fall in that? When you first started, where did you fall? And have you consistently found yourself in that category? Were you anxious and still anxious, or were you like, where did you fall?
Yeah. So when I first joined PDS, I was like, I am definitely anxious preoccupied.
Me too. Yep. Yeah.
And I was like, this is it. I'm definitely AP. And as I came to work on meeting my own needs, regulating my emotions, working on my core wounds, I started noticing that there were avoidant patterns coming up in the way that I related, especially to my family. and sometimes friendships, but largely family. And I was like, what the heck? That's really weird. What happened to all the anxiety and the fear of abandonment? And, some of that was still there, but I came to recognize that I was actually FA and then leaned anxious preoccupied in romantic relationships as those big triggers of abandonment and fears of rejection came up in the attachment to somebody else. That really kind of amplified and was very present and, very easy to recognize, and some of the like avoidance kind of like popped down below the surface. And so as I cleared out a lot of the anxiousness, I recognized the fearful
I had
avoidance
that
was really
same
there.
similar experience where, yeah, when I came in, I'm thinking I'm leaning certainly into the anxious, but I always questioned it because I thought, well, my childhood was pretty chaotic. So I was like, I don't feel how I fit in there, right? And
Yeah.
as I certainly learned more about myself and learned more about the program, I started to realize I am more into that fearful avoidance style, but I definitely lean into the anxious, right? I certainly in the relationship with my wife, I was certainly leaning into that as she was more fearful avoidant, leaning into her
Yeah.
dismissive. So we had that kind of push pull
Yeah.
dynamic going on here. So great. Well, thanks so much for that introduction to the different attachment styles.
Of
You
course.
specialize really in teaching a lot about the anxious preoccupied style that we just talked about here. Can you give us a little bit more detail about that? What does that really look like? If I'm an anxious preoccupied, what are some of the characteristics? How would I recognize that maybe I have an issue here and maybe I am into this anxious preoccupied type of attachment style?
Yeah. So as I touched on earlier, a lot of that comes from, real or perceived abandonment in childhood. And to give an example of that, like I mentioned earlier, my dad was gone a lot. Growing up, my bedroom was right next to the garage. And so my dad would leave very early for work. And so I would always hear the garage door open at like 3 in the morning and recognize my dad was leaving. And I would freak out because I'm like, my dad's leaving. Oh my gosh. I don't have the idea that, oh, nope, he's just going to work. He'll be back. It'll be okay. Right. I don't have that like logical or capacity to really emotionally process that information. All I know as a child is my dad's leaving. And so that really created this perception that my dad was abandoning me, right? He wasn't really actually, but you got to go make a living, right? So that created this sense of perceived abandonment for me, and what helped to really condition that fear of abandonment, which then gets projected onto adult romantic relationships later. And where, very often we don't necessarily, I think people can also have the confusion that, oh, well, like my parents really never left, they were pretty good. But it can also even be that, hey, your parents work really long hours. Or it can also be, anywhere that there's real inconsistencies in parenting. So different parenting styles. Maybe one parent is really approach oriented, very present with a child. So maybe more like traditional households where mom's really attuned and maybe dad's kind of sitting back on the
Right.
couch with a beer.
Yeah.
Don't talk about your emotions, not interested, uh, incongruencies in parenting styles as well. I get love from this, but I'm not getting that attunement. And again, that perceived abandonment or rejection even of love. And so very often for anxious preoccupied individuals, this is happening at a very early age. And so as a result of that, we come to feel this sense of emotional and mental unsafety around our attachment to our caregivers, our primary caregivers. And what, at the time, we at least have the understanding that if my parents can't show up for me, then this is a real survival threat, right? If I'm not going to get this love, then this is a real big problem. So, in order to get that met, I need to, basically cling. I need to get close. I need proximity to these people so they don't leave me. And in order to try to gain a sense of that safety and security and certainty. And so they really, and again, where that kind of becomes a huge factor and issue in adult romantic relationships for the anxious preoccupied, because those strategies to try to get their needs met really don't change. And so they tend to come to project those things onto their romantic partners which for the romantic partner and likely the avoidant individual
Right.
feels really overwhelming, right? Like, holy crap, I need to put out all of the fires for them all the time. And again, where the AP has essentially been conditioned to not really understand how to soothe themselves. They get their needs met from others, they get soothed through others, and very externally focused, and really don't have much of a relationship to themselves. And so as a result, they are very dependent on other people.
So it sounds like they just have a tough time being alone. It seems like, they just
Yeah.
their fear that the subconscious realm, because now they've developed this through the childhood, right? That fear of abandonment, mom and dad's not there. There's a little bit of that inconsistency. So they get very clingy for survival purposes, right? And so, so they take this false perception into their adult lives and now into their relationships, and they're now acting, with their current spouse, if you will, this love connection as an adult, almost in a childhood manner, where that brain is still kind of working in that fear of abandonment and stuff like that. So how
Yeah.
does that look like, like in a relationship? Like, obviously we get a little taste of that, but like, what does that really begin to look like, and how does that really become extremely detrimental to the point where, it's now pushing people away, right? It's actually, as much as we want to hold on, that holding on is what's causing the other person to want to get away from us because it becomes overbearing for them, right? So is that kind of like, how does that work a little bit?
Yeah. So this is the person that really wants to text all the time, right? They want to be in communication. They want to spend a lot of time together, right? In terms of, hey, how would I identify maybe somebody or yourself as an anxious preoccupied, constantly talking to a romantic partner, or if they're not in dating or romance at the moment, that will be kind of exported onto friendships. So texting, you'll see a lot of clinging, also to say, like, APs are also wonderful people.
Right. There's a lot of great
where
qualities.
where
Yeah.
we tend to look at yeah, we tend to look at the negative so that we can understand that and work on it. And I always like taking a little bit of a moment to remind people that it's like APs aren't just these horrible, horrible people
Sure.
that push on others, but we really want to understand what are the negative pieces so that way we can work on
Right.
those, right? So as I mentioned, clinging, texting, often you'll see, especially as those fears of abandonment come up, overstepping people's boundaries. And that can be, in the extreme, like showing up to somebody's house when they've asked for space, or even more extreme, showing up at somebody's job during work hours to be
Right.
like, I haven't heard from you. And where a lot of these are just really, and again, I think inauthentic expressions of ourselves, but how we don't understand to or know how to soothe ourselves. So we have to get that from somebody else. Right. So let's see what else. They can also be, in not understanding their needs or how to, meet those things themselves. They can come across as quite critical, often are people pleasers, right? Where that fear of abandonment, rejection, and being alone is so big that they kind of push their needs aside in order to try to maintain the connection at any cost. And so it's like, oh, well, my needs are less important. Also, some codependent pieces
I was
there.
going to say that
So they
codependent,
should
right?
be
Yeah.
showing up for my
Yeah.
needs.
Falling into that codependent realm
Yeah,
almost. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And so, APs really tend to struggle. Often they'll be good for the first couple of weeks, right? They tend to want to rush into connection. So they'll kind of push for the certainty and safety of a relationship very quickly. And they're like, yeah, everything's good until we have sex, until there is a commitment and we actually form that attachment to somebody, right? And that's where those big fears of abandonment really start. And then it's like, well, now I'm checking their Instagram page and they like that, person's post, and oh my God, that
Right.
they must really love them. And
Yeah.
yeah, and again, you hear in that some of the hypervigilance and fears of abandonment and rejection start to come up and really occupy a lot of the AP mind. And what can be an incredibly detrimental piece is like they live so much in their head around that and constantly looking out for and fearing the abandonment that they never really get any sense of peace in their own mind. which is a huge challenge for
It's
APs.
painful for sure. Yeah. I have a hard time. Can you share with us a little bit about the integrated attachment theory program that Thais Gibson created? Can you give
Yeah.
us the core elements of that, and how would that work for somebody who's saying anxious preoccupied? How would that play out?
Yeah. So let's kind of cover the broad basics. So integrated attachment theory is the Thais' trademark work that covers basically 6 different components in order to become securely attached. So as we talked about earlier, we want to go beyond just understanding our attachment style and really work through that to become secure. So first, we've touched on a little bit already is the core wounds or core beliefs. And that being something that is essentially the emotionally and subconsciously conditioned beliefs that we pick up, as I mentioned earlier, around abandonment, that aren't logical beliefs. They're, again, emotionally conditioned subconscious beliefs. We have our relationship needs and expectations. And these are essentially the things that we need in order to thrive, right? Our body has physical needs. We need to breathe, sleep, go to the bathroom,
Yeah.
eat. Our relationships also have needs. Our relationship to ourself has needs, which is something that APs really have to work on, and our relationships to other people have needs. And without those things, we really tend to wilt and we tend to feel a lack of fulfillment. Next, we have our emotional regulation, right? So nervous system regulation, somatic processing, being able to get in touch with our emotions, soothe ourselves. Next, we have our relationship to boundaries. For the AP, we know that is not much of a relationship or an absent relationship. And again, where, the AP observes boundaries as almost in more of like a literal definition of this is a separation between me and somebody else. And as a result of having those big fears of abandonment and being alone, they will not and are unwilling to set boundaries as a perception of, well, that creates disconnection from me and this person. And I really want connection and proximity to this person. So boundaries not happening. So next so we did boundaries, then we're going to do communication. So how do we communicate? I mentioned earlier APs as a result of not showing up for their needs, having some codependent expectations, tend to get quite resentful towards others for not meeting those needs. And so they can be very critical in finally getting to the point or the breaking point of not getting their needs met, can be like, well, you always, or the you nevers,
Gotcha. Right.
right? You never text me back.
Right.
Yeah, things become very black and white.
Gotcha. Yep. Makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. So and then I touched on this a little bit, but our relationship expectations. So the things that sort of like the shoulds, how somebody should show up in a relationship, like a relationship should be the highest
Yeah.
priority for other people, which isn't always the case. My partner should always soothe me.
Right.
And again, a lot of these codependent expectations themselves aren't necessarily good or bad, but we need to communicate about them and get on the same page and also very often find meaningful compromises. So we did boundaries, expectations. Man, the
Behaviors.
last one's going to elude me. I knew
I
this
mean,
was going to happen.
behaviors.
What's that?
Behaviors.
Behaviors,
Yeah.
yes.
I
Coping
got you.
mechanisms. Yeah, I appreciate the backup, man. So our coping mechanisms, which really are the unhealthy strategies that we have to try to get our needs met. And, we are going to naturally develop ways to get our needs met, even if we aren't conscious of it. And very often those are essentially uh, often unhealthy means of trying to get our needs met and things that just really don't end up feeling fulfilling for us. And what also tend to become driving wedges between us and our partner because they aren't very healthy, because, again, they aren't fulfilling strategies and come from a space of, most likely childhood. They're just not meaningful strategies. And so we really have to be able to come to understand what those are and create healthier strategies to really meaningfully show up for our needs.
Almost finding a little bit more balance too with like the whole thing, not
Yeah.
just pulling, like you said, we're the relationship is all encompassing, and there really is like you had in your life at one time, like, hey, you have no other, you have nothing else going on but this relationship. It's like, oh, wait a second, maybe I
Yeah.
put all my eggs in one basket, and instead I need to find some balance
Yeah.
in life and have some other issues, and things that I enjoy doing and things that fulfill me in ways that so that the relationship is part of my experience, it's part of my life, and it can
Yeah.
be the most wonderful part of our life, but it doesn't have to be the
Yeah.
all or nothing or all encompassing thing where God
Exactly.
forbid this one person decides, hey, I can't do this anymore. We're now left stranded
Yeah.
and feeling completely abandoned and alone. And that's a very scary spot. I've certainly been there myself. And so
Yes.
it's very important as an anxious preoccupied to really begin to understand yourself a little bit, begin to understand some of the wounds that we're dealing with, and maybe look at ourselves and decide, hey, are we acting on our wounds here, or are we acting more from a secure spot? And obviously, when
Yeah.
we have these wounds, we're probably going to notice, yeah, my patterns are setting up to show me, like, hey, maybe I'm doing some things wrong here that are actually causing people to not want to be around me. They're pushing me away, not because they don't care or whatever. It's just that that's a natural dynamic. The more somebody tries to cling, sometimes somebody needs to breathe a little bit, so they kind of push it away. But to the anxious, that feels like they don't love them anymore. Like, it feels very painful, right?
Yeah.
So, and I agree. Yeah,
Yep.
those boundaries are tough, right? I always say boundaries are kind of like the fence around the house, and the fence is there to protect
Yeah.
the house, right? We're the house. You're right. And so an anxious person wants no fence. Yeah, just come right up. No worries. Just come right on into the house anytime. Yeah, anytime, right? Whereas sometimes, like, on the flip side, you might have a dismissive avoidant that has a huge fence where it's like, hey, just stay away, right? They have
Yeah.
super big boundaries at times. So
Yeah.
what we have to find is what are good, healthy boundaries. All these things you just mentioned, right? How do we communicate in a way that actually works and really moves the needle? Sometimes we're talking in different ways. Well, if I'm an anxious person and I have a dismissive, say, partner, we may just be missing each other because we are totally unaware of each other's needs and what they really want and how to communicate in ways that don't hurt our partner. Sometimes we're communicating ways that we don't realize we're doing it. But sometimes we're hurting our
Yeah.
partners in ways that we don't even realize. And so all this stuff is fascinating work. And that is the stuff that I got really hooked on too, right? Sounds like you did like me. We got hooked on this with Thais Gibson's work has just been a game changer for me. So you've been in this now for a bunch of years. You're on your way, really helping a lot of people do this. What does it look like for somebody if they did want to, get healing and start this process? How long does it take for somebody maybe to go from an anxious, preoccupied style to maybe into this cure? Is it a couple of weeks? Is it a couple of years? Does it vary? I mean, what does that look like?
I thought it would take like 3 months.
Yeah, just
When I first joined PDS, I was like, oh, make it invested in myself and this will be so great. And, 3 months I'll be secure and it'll be amazing. I can tell you, spoiler alert, it takes longer than 3 months. And I think one of the mistakes that I see a lot is that people observe becoming secure as an endpoint versus this starting to be, really cultivating a relationship to yourself and more of a journey, right? This is something that we will continuously work on in the relationships that we have. Our relationships naturally change. We can't control that. That is just people change over time. And so this is something that you will, kind of be unlocking the key of being able to develop a meaningful relationship to yourself for the rest of your life, which I think is incredible. And it can be challenging at the beginning. But, one thing that I'll often tell people is if you're really willing to put in the work, and, I think some people think that they're ready for that and maybe aren't, but for those that are really truly ready for all of that, if you invest, I see really meaningful changes in the students and clients that I work with in 3 months, right? So the way that I'll describe that is if Bryan were in a relationship and Bryan, you trigger me today and maybe you touched on my abandonment wounds and you said you were going to leave me. How dare you? And I'm triggered like at 8 out of 10, right? 0 being not triggered at all, 10 being the most triggered I could ever be. If I'm really willing to put in that work, I start the reprogramming, start showing up for my needs, start setting meaningful boundaries, some of the, pillars that we talked about in terms of IAT. Let's say that the exact same experience happens in 3 months and I have done that work. that's going to be a 3 or a 4. Right? The emotional intensity with which I experience that is what I'm looking to be able to change. And that is what I really observe as developing a secure attachment style, is that I now have the tools to be able to respond and deal with the experiences that come up. Because becoming secure isn't about being a robot. It's not about, hey, I'm never going to be triggered
Right.
again. We don't live in, a box, right? We live with other people that are naturally going to trigger us. Things are going to happen. Unfortunately, people are going to pass away. Relationships are going to end, whether that be romantic or friendships. Like, this is a part of life. And the more that I can cultivate meaningful skills to learn how to deal with that and condition my nervous system to respond appropriately by working on it over time, that is what I really observe as becoming secure. And that's what I really love being able to help people cultivate, is cultivating those meaningful skills to be able to change that, because we really can, as
I love
I
that.
think both of us can attest
I
to.
agree. To me, it's about the tools. I never had the tools, right? And so
Yeah.
this program has given me a lot of tools. It doesn't mean that the situations don't arise again. They do, but you're handling them at a
Yeah.
totally different level, different awarenesses that go on, and your ability to kind of navigate those in a much healthier, better way really is the game changer as to how happy your life can be, and those connections can develop in a more positive way. Jake, we're getting close to the end, man. I could sit here all day with you, but I want to make sure that people know how to
Likewise.
get in touch with you. If somebody wants to learn more about this stuff and they would love to work with you, how can they reach you?
Yeah, a couple different ways. So I would say probably the easiest right now is through my email, jake@personaldevelopmentschool.com. Paul. I also have different ways in which I work with clients. I'm starting up my own social media presence. That'll be at consciousintentionalitycoaching.com. It'll be on Instagram.
Gotcha.
So add the at in there.
Awesome. And I'll make sure we get the links in there for the show. So if you find us anywhere out there, you should be able to get those links. We'll make sure you can get in touch with Jake. So Jake, man, this is a lot of fun. I love it. You know me, I can talk about
Yeah,
this
man.
stuff all day. It's been a game changer in my life. It sounds like it's been in yours as well. And so I want to thank you so much for sharing your personal journey and your insights as to how this has managed to change your life. So thanks for being with us here today.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And thanks, Matt.
Guys, I want to thank everybody for also puts the show together. Really excited for my team. I want to especially thank Jen Corte. She is my marketing manager. She does a great job. If you're interested and need some marketing, go to savvyedgemarketing.com. That's savvy with 2 V's, and look for Jen. She's great. Thanks for joining us here on the show. I hope you got some great information out of this. If you like this show, no matter where you get your content, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, the best thing you can do for us is like us, follow us, subscribe, and be a part of this journey. If you have any questions, leave some comments. We're happy to reply to your comments on any of those platforms as well. And the greatest thing you could ever do for us is, just share this podcast with any friends or family members, anybody that you think could get some benefit from this type of show. And that is the greatest compliment you could ever pay us. So guys, thank you so much for joining us this week. And I'll see you next week here on the My Relationship Failed podcast. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the My Relationship Fell podcast. For more great content, visit www.myrelationshipfell.com and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at My Relationship Fell. Please be advised, the information presented on this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health provider. Until next week, take care.